All right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, YouTube, whenever you're watching this, wherever you're watching this. My name is Rosh, and this is a video series I'm putting together called AxeFX 3 Basics, and these are going to show some of my approaches on how I build presets. So a little about me. I'm an LA-based guitar player and guitar tech. Some of my clients include Steve Vai, Dweezil Zappa, Leppard, Melissa Etheridge, Perfect Circle, and more. So I wanted to give back to the Fractal community and show some of my approaches on how I build presets in the Fractal Audio AxeFX 3. So I want to thank everybody who's been commenting and making requests for videos. You guys are awesome. So shout out to you guys. I would be more than happy to cover any topics you guys would like. So by all means, feel free to leave any topics you want me to cover in the comments on any of the videos, and I will do my best to get back to them. I'm also on the Fractal Audio forum, so I do try to do some support and help all the people who post on that forum. Also, I'm one of Fractal Audio's beta testers. So anyways, so in this video, I saw a post on the forum, and people were talking about how to use some of the functions in the delay block. So I felt like, well, I haven't covered the delay block yet, so let's get to it. So in a previous video, I made this preset, and it's just a basic generic kind of clean sound. And I'm using the deluxe reverb with a cabinet. So, all right, so let's talk about the delay block and kind of what all the parameters do in here. So when you load the delay block, and what I did was I just right-clicked and added a block, or you can go up to here and do insert block, or you can even do quick build. There's a million ways to do it. So let's talk about placement first. So if you place the delay in front of the amp, what happens is the amplifier always sums it to mono, because even though you might have stereo inputs on real guitar amps, what this does is it just sums it to mono. So you end up getting a delay right up the middle. And if you put the delay block at the end, so after the cabinet, regardless of if it's in stereo or mono, you'll end up getting a stereo delay effect depending on the delay type. So this is a mono delay right now. But for example, if we do like a ping pong delay, it'll go from left to right. So I would recommend definitely using either headphones to listen to this video, or if you have studio monitors or something so you can really hear that the panning. So it's going from left to right. So that's the number one thing you want to think about, because if you put it in the front and leading into an amp, it will always sum it up to mono. There's other ways to get it stereo in front of an amp, but that's more advanced topic. We'll just cover some basics now. So let's go back and let's reset this channel. And so the time parameter right here just sets how many milliseconds it will be before the echo repeats again. So it'll be 500 milliseconds in this case. So every 500 milliseconds, there is a new note. And if you increase the time, of course, the time will be further away. And if you shorten the time, it'll be faster. Next to it is the tempo. And these are all the tempo subdivisions you can do. The most common tempos that most delay pedals use is the half note, quarter note, dotted eighth note, and 16th note. So without getting too much into music theory, basically, if you do a whole note, which is 1, you have to look at this tempo marking. So at 100 BPM, that's the tempo right here. So right about there. And every whole note, which is every 4 counts, it'll generate 1 note. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And if you make this a half note, every 2 clicks, it'll generate a note. 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So I'm probably not quite synced up to that, but I'm just trying to look at the tempo up there. Now here's quarter notes. So every click that you see up here, that's when you'll get a note. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then after that, this is dotted eighth note. So every dotted eighth note, which is 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E, and I'll try to clap into the microphone. 1E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. So Okay, and the dotted eighth note is definitely something that is used a lot for, let's say, if you play a lot of worship music, a lot of church music. That's kind of generally the sound that they use a lot. And then eighth notes. So you'll get for every 2 pulses, or for every pulse, you'll get 2 notes. And of course, what you want to do is, depending on the tempo that you're playing at, let's say we drop it down to 100. Now each of these subdivisions is going to also automatically do this. So at eighth notes at 100 BPM, so if we take away the delay, so let's say that would be the tempo of the song. So if we were using an echo at eighth notes, it would be da 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 da. So, all right, and then you can use 16th notes. So it would be 4 for every pulse. You would get 4 notes. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and so on. So let's do eighth notes for right now. And then the next knob is feedback. And the feedback knob is how many repeats you have after the initial one. So the higher the feedback, the more repeats you'll get. And as you bring this down, and then if you do it in negative values, you'll get like reverse. The delay will actually be coming out backwards. So it's a pretty interesting effect. So basically, if you looked at it as a waveform, it would actually be in reverse. So the rest of the parameters here are really dependent on which delay you use. So for example, if you use the 2290, it has some of this. But if you use like, let's say maybe the tape, it has different parameters after this. The main parameters for most delays that you're going to be working with are the parameters of tempo and then the feedback. And then depending if it's a stereo delay, you'll end up getting rows down here. So definitely in terms of this video, there's a lot to cover that we won't do today. This is just kind of like the basics. So we'll go back to, let's reset this channel. We'll go back to digital mono. So if you have a digital stereo delay, now you have the parameters for both the left and the right side. So for example, if you want more repeats on the left side, you would crank this up, but the right side would be less. And you can also, and you see how sometimes they automatically sync up with each other. And then it also depends on the ratio that you're using here. Again, we won't cover that in this video too much because those are some of the more advanced parameters. But as you increase this, this knob is sure to follow, but if, again, the ratio between them, you'll notice that the AxeFX automatically does this. So, for example, on the left side, you'll have 44% and then 65%. So the right side has more repeats than the left with this ratio. And some of these ratios are really cool to work with. So that's a really common one. Here's 100%, that means they're even. So if you put 75%, you kind of get like a dotted eighth note thing. And then as you go to, I think it was 66%, you end up getting like a... mess with some of these values. These are very common values that people use when they're using ratios between digital delays. So for example, if you come from the Strymon kind of delays, this is very common to the Strymon Dig. If you're familiar with that pedal, they have a knob on there that's the ratio knob, and basically all it is just adjusting the ratio between the left and the right side. So you can come up with cool values. The ones that I like to use are definitely 75. And then the 66. And then also the inverse of them. So for example, 33 would be analogous to 66. And then also 25. Okay, so there's a lot to cover here. We'll just do this digital stereo one. Now the next one is the master feedback. So of course this controls the entire, how many repeats, not just if one side's getting more than the other, but how many repeats in that ratio. So if we go back to the 75%, what happens is you're like, well, I want more repeats. So you would end up using this master feedback knob. So you see how there's a lot more repeats, and if we do this, a lot less. And so on and so forth. So let's reset this block. Oh yeah, this is the spread. And again, these are some advanced parameters that we're not going to cover in this video, but I would be more than happy to cover in the future. The one important thing that I really do want to go over is actually this bypass mode. This is probably the biggest challenge for most people when they start with an AxeFX, understanding what the bypass mode actually does. So let's cover that. And so let's see. Okay. So when you have the bypass mode set, what's going to happen is, let's start with through. So when this delay block is with the bypass mode set to through, that when you bypass this block, all your audio just goes right through it without being affected at all. So now here's with the delay. And you notice that if, let's just turn this feedback up so it's easier to hear. If I turn off this delay, so the repeats also disappear. And then they're back on. Now, when you hear that, it may be a little hard to hear, but let me turn the mix up. You can still hear that there's repeats when I turn the block on. So for example, if I play a note, it turns off, but if I turn the block back on, there's still repeats happening in the background. So what's happening is you want to visualize your audio signal actually going through this like light or something. So your audio is going through this delay block and it's still oscillating. It's still, the delay block is still occurring, but it's muted, meaning that it's bypassed. They're not sending the delay signal through here. So this is definitely something you may want to experiment with, especially if you're trying to spill over between scenes or presets. So for example, if you are playing this and you mute it, but you still want more repeats when you come back, that's really important. The other thing is if I play a note, and it doesn't re-trigger the delay when it's bypassed. Okay, so some of the other bypass modes definitely do that. So now let's talk about mute in and mute out. So mute out prevents actually signal from leaving the block. Okay, so, and then you notice that it's still accepting audio in there. So, and then mute in means that it's going to mute from the input stage of the block rather than the output stage. So again, and then you notice that even if I'm playing with the block muted, so it's accepting signal in there. And then let's do mute effects in. So what that means is that it's going to mute just the effect only as it's leaving the block. So for example, it's muting at the input stage of the delay block. But now I have regular guitar signal as opposed to the block being completely muted, my whole audio being shut off. So this is another one that you would use if you want to have some spillover. See, the delay keeps continuing even after the block is bypassed. Now, if you use mute effects out, that means at the output stage, the delay block turns off and it actually mutes any delay repeats from coming out of the block. But you still get audio coming through here. So you may be asking, well, why would I use mute in and mute out ever if I'm going like this? And the reason why is, of course, if you run the blocks in parallel. So this is really important to understand if you run delays in parallel, because now you're going to get certain ways you use the bypass mode, you're going to get actual extra volume in there, and that's super important. So for example, if I go back to through, if you look at this routing, what's happening is your guitar signal's coming in through here, going through the amp, and it's going through this delay block, and now it's set to through. So you have some audio signal being passed through here, and you have audio signal being passed through here. So now effectively you've doubled your output. So you hear that's much louder. And for even better demonstration, I'll disconnect this audio, and you're still hearing audio because audio is coming through here. If I connect both, and now it's a lot more. So if you're ever running in parallel like this, you don't want to use through. So now let's talk about mute out. So if I disconnect the shunt, that means there's no signal leaving this block. It's only going in, and then in the bypass mode, it's muting the output of that block. So if you're running in parallel, that's definitely what you want to use. But turning on the delay block with the mute out, you see how it just mutes that mutes the delays coming out of that block. So if you want to run in parallel, but you also want spillover, you want your echoes to continue even after the block is bypassed, you want to use mute in as opposed to mute out. So this mutes the audio at the input stage, but that means anything past the input stage that's already in this block will leave this block, such as the echoes. So for example, and there you go. And the other thing is, by being bypassed, it's muting every signal, all the signal that is going in here into this block, so you don't get this extra volume coming out of here. So again, to demonstrate, I'll disconnect that shunt. There's no audio leaving the block. So again, running in parallel, if you want some spillover, use mute in. If you don't want spillover, use mute out. And that's running only in parallel. Now, if you're not running in parallel, you run into some volume jump issues when you start using mute effects in and out. Because now, with mute effects in, you're only muting the delay signal, not the actual dry signal. So I'll disconnect the shunt again. And you can hear that there's audio being passed through here into the output stage, but nothing here because it's disconnected. So if both of these shunts are connected, now you're going to get extra volume. And ouch, right? So that is definitely double the volume. So if you're running in parallel, do not use these two because you'll end up getting this jump in volume. It's like using through, but you're using mute effects out and in. So to sum it up, if you're running in parallel like this, if you want some spillover, use mute in. So it's going to mute the audio once it gets into the block, but it won't mute any audio leaving the block. So here's some spillover. Delay is still ringing. And of course, there's no audio being passed through this shunt, only through the dry sound. And again, if you're also running in parallel, you definitely want to use 100% mix and 100% gain using the level knob to adjust that. So, and then let's do mute out. So if you do mute out, that means it's going to stop any signal from leaving this delay block. So you don't get any spillover. Okay. Now, if you're running in series like this, you don't want to use the mute in and mute out because you will bypass, when this block is bypassed, you won't get any audio. So if you're in series like this, use mute effects in and mute effects out. Mute effects in will let your signal come into the delay block and you'll get spillover. Your echoes will spill over when you do this. Oh, and let's adjust that. And your echo repeats will continue on even after the block is bypassed. And if you use mute effects out, the block, when bypassed, will also mute the echo repeats. So it's a lot of options, but definitely the two that most people will use commonly is if you're running in series like this, use mute effects in for the spillover, because that just sounds better personally, unless you really need to abruptly stop the delays, and then use mute in when you're running in parallel. And again, this is so that you can engage spillover rather than having the delay block mute there. So that's definitely a lot of information. So the number one thing is definitely experiment. Try different ways that you want to do. But again, if you don't want any volume jumps and you're using parallel shunting or anything like that, it's really important to pay attention to the bypass mode. So I'll definitely in the future cover more delay stuff. It's definitely my forte, definitely one of my favorite blocks to use in the AxeFX. But each of the delay blocks is like has its own unique thing and own unique character. So I definitely want to like cover, each delay more in depth, which I will be happy to do in the future. So if you guys need any help or want to contact me to cover more topics, I would be more than happy to. Leave a comment below, like, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. Until then, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.